We made a puppet for Dvořák in America that previewed here last January of Kovařík, but we never used it. We cut that scene that I wrote. Sweating all night. So here he is.
Microphone.
All right. Microphone. And he's very happy. In mid-September 1892, the Maestro set off on the journey to America with his spouse, their daughter Ottilie, and their son Antonín. The voyage over the sea took 9 days, and it was very pleasant, apart from about 3 days, when it was quite stormy, when all the passengers, except for the Maestro, stayed in their cabins. The Maestro was an excellent seafarer. The whole day long, no matter how much it stormed, he would stroll around the deck. Several times it happened that the Maestro was the only passenger to come to the dining room. And when the captain, Rink, saw him alone there, he invited the Maestro to his table, and having had their fill of breakfast or lunch, and seeing as no one else was in the room, they lit their cigars and talked. On Thursday, 29th of September, unless I'm mistaken, after 6 o'clock in the evening, the ship put in at the port in New York near Staten Island. At that time, all ships, but especially ships originating from Hamburg, were subjected to a strict quarantine due to a cholera outbreak, which had mainly affected Hamburg. But the Saale was released from quarantine on the afternoon of the second day, and around 3 p.m. we debarked on the American mainland. Mr. Stanton, who was the secretary of the National Conservatory at the time, stood on the quay waiting to greet the Maestro, and after the usual customs check, he drove us to Clarendon Hotel, where rooms were booked for the Maestro, including a concert piano. Clarendon Hotel, where the Maestro spent 4 weeks, stood on the corner of East 18th Street and 4th Avenue, not far from the National Conservatory. It does not exist anymore. Because the Maestro did not feel at ease with himself at the hotel, and he longed for different accommodation, it was difficult to find a flat close to the conservatory that would suit the Maestro. Finally, they found one at 327 East 17th Street, opposite Stuyvesant Park, with Mrs. Drew. And seeing that the conservatory was in the same street as number 128, 130, the Maestro did not have to walk far. The Maestro lived in that flat for the whole duration of his stay in New York. The house is still standing. We are in 1927. It has as yet endured the frantic bustle of construction that has affected the area, but for how long? symphony from the New World was finished. The conservatory closed down for the holidays, and the maestro, who was a tireless worker, became grumpy from lack of things to do. He was quite irritable, sullen, absent-minded, at times even angry. It was hardly possible to speak with him. Often, even the plainest of questions angered him greatly. Sometimes he answered, but oftentimes he did not answer at all. It was always like that when he wove and concentrated his thoughts on a new work. But as soon as the new opus was decided, with its thoughts focused, the maestro took to work and transformed completely. But the situation that week was much more severe, as it was the maestro's intention, as soon as the children would disembark, to set off to Spillville. And thus he did not want to begin any new work. He was not in the mood for it at all. He thought only of his children. He accompanied them on their journey, thought by thought. That tense expectation, the uncertainty of whether they would survive the trip in safety, whether or not they were suffering from seasickness, whether the boat would not be delayed by a storm, thus postponing the day of their arrival, all this brought about a mood that was not of the rosiest complexion. It was thus necessary to engage the maestro in some other way. We traveled from place to the pigeons in Central Park, to the port, both for ships that docked and for those that weighed anchor, to the hill on 155th Street to watch trains. But it was not enough. We would come home, the maestro would sit to the piano and play, but after 5 minutes he would get up and say, "Come, we will walk in the park." We lived opposite to Stuyvesant Park. We would traverse the park or orchard several times, and then return home, and then off again to some other location. And so it was the whole week long. Every evening we played Darda, a card game that Dvořák taught Kovařík. That would calm the maestro down somewhat, and because we were still playing for cents with the winnings placed in the bank, the game was relaxed. That week, I congratulated myself every evening on the excellent idea of playing for cents. Then finally there came the long-awaited day of the children's expected arrival. It was Wednesday, 31st May. The day before, I went to the telegraph company and requested a telegram to be sent to us the moment the ship Havel, which had the children on board, would be spotted. Around 11 o'clock, we received a telegram that the ship Havel had been observed near Fire Island, some 35 miles from New York, where there was a naval watch point, and that the ship would make port around 3 in the afternoon. The maestro was full of impatience and the desire to see his children, whom he had been separated from for the past 9 months, and he kept on nagging and pushing us to hurry. All my efforts to explain that we would be there much too early were in vain. We set off for the port and came there at 1:30 and had to wait another hour and a half. But when we were there, the maestro calmed down and patiently awaited the Havel's arrival. Finally, the ship appeared in the distance and slowly made its way up the River Hudson. The long-desired moment was there. In the tow of 2 tugs, the ship turned and slowly neared the landing to the tune of a brisk march played by the ship's band. The maestro looked at the top deck in anxious expectation and finally laid his eyes on his 4 children, who were standing lined up neatly by the railing from oldest to youngest. The following Saturday, June 3rd, the 3rd day after the children's arrival, we set off to Spillville, Iowa for the holidays. The Maestro was restless the whole week after I returned from Spillville. In the afternoon, the Maestro would visit Fleischmann's Cafe, which does not exist anymore. Back then, it was on the corner of Broadway and 10th Street, where he would meet Antonín Dvořák, who was conductor of the New York Philharmonic at the time, and also the German conductor mainly of Wagner operas at the Metropolitan Opera. Seidel was an excellent conductor, especially of Wagner. He had spent considerable time in the company of that great man, and so the Maestro often asked Seidel about Wagner, what was his method of work, etc. Those were fascinating conversations, discussions, often even debates that could become pretty rough. But everything turned out well in the end. Apparently they would both ruminate on their conversations, and so when they met up the following day, the one or the other would admit that he had been partly mistaken, and all was well. I will include one example of their conversations. One day the Maestro claimed that the best of Wagner's operas was Tannhäuser, but Seidel disagreed, and a lengthy debate started that was not finished that day. But as soon as they greeted each other the next day, Seidel began, "So, I was thinking the whole evening about our discussion yesterday. I considered the matter from all perspectives and admit that you were right. As far as the operatic aspect is concerned, Tannhäuser is the best. But do you know Siegfried?" The Maestro said that he had heard Siegfried only once, to which Seidel promised to secure the Maestro tickets for the next performance he would conduct. The tickets arrived, and they were for the boxes of the so-called Diamond Horseshoe, the row of boxes whose ticket holders attend the performance at the last moment, or usually after the performance had begun, but burdened with diamonds, all in full dress. But we were not aware of any of that at the time. The Maestro simply took a darkish suit. I chose the darkest one of my own humble wardrobe, but even that was very light. Whenever the Maestro was supposed to go somewhere, he was always in a hurry to come on time. And this time, to avoid coming late, we hurried off and set off well in advance. The usher whom I gave our tickets to gazed at us in surprise. Well, I do not want to claim that his surprise was caused by our dress, but I'm firmly convinced that it was because he was not used to ushering guests to the boxes a good half hour before the start of the performance. But either way, we entered our box. The seats were all around us, gaped in emptiness. The Maestro took his watch out and remarked, "Well, another half hour. We went a bit too early." We sat down. The box was very comfortable. We were the only two there, more than enough room. The audience slowly started trickling into the parterres, so at least we had something to look at. After a while, Maestro announced 20 minutes left, and 15, then I announced 12, and thus we passed time. Suddenly, we heard voices in the neighboring box. The Maestro turned, inspected the newcomers, and immediately sat himself one chair backwards. I did the same. The people in the neighboring box had come in full dress, and the others who followed had done likewise, and the Maestro and I kept seating ourselves further back. Finally, the wall blocked us from going any further. So we sat each in one corner, anxiously awaiting for the lights to go out and the opera to begin. The lights finally went out. The Maestro and I crept one chair forward and listened. But we found ourselves amidst a constant babble, and although the Maestro threw a stern look at several of the conversers, it was to no avail. When the first act ended, we went home. Our usher gave another surprised look. Perhaps he was thinking, strange patrons. Others are only just arriving and they are already going home. At their usual meeting the next day, Seidel asked the Maestro what he thought of Siegfried, and without hesitation the Maestro admitted to having gone home after the first act. The execution, as far as he had heard it, had been excellent, but he had had enough of the endlessly repetitive, unchanging rhythm of